night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Good evening, good morning, and welcome, everyone. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm your host, JV Johnson. Thanks for being here with me tonight. If you're watching on our YouTube stream, I know we're having some audio issues there. Not sure why. I just get so frustrated because everything works just fine, and then suddenly, without reason, without any explanation whatsoever, everything changes. That's the world of, I guess, Windows? I don't know. Jason, when he's on the program, he has a Mac. He has problems too. So I don't know. I don't know what's happening, but we should be found. we should sound fine, is what I meant to say, on the air. So that's what's important. In the meantime, we're going to try to fix the stream audio during our breaks, but it's just hard to do it while we're live. And we have a great show for you tonight, too. So I'm anxious to get the audio stuff fixed. We've got Jason McClean coming on the program in just a little bit. He's a biblical paranormal researcher. Many times, those two words, biblical and paranormal, don't go hand in hand. But actually, our guest, Jason McClean, says they do, and they do very, very well. In fact, the existence of UFOs and cryptids like Bigfoot actually validate the narrative that's found within biblical texts. And this is a pretty important time of year to be talking about that, given the fact that yesterday was Easter, which I hope everybody had a great Easter weekend. I know a lot of people had vacations, family vacations, that kind of thing. Hope it all was wonderful. And you got a chance to enjoy it with family, friends, all the people that are important to you. But Jason's going to talk about that when we bring him on. Looking ahead, we've got some great guests coming up. Tomorrow night, Brian Keating, who is an astrophysicist, will be with us. He's going to help us answer some of the longest standing and biggest questions that mankind has ever faced. Things like, how did the universe begin and evolve? How will the universe end? How did life begin, and how did consciousness arise? Those are big questions indeed, and we'll be talking about them with Brian Keating tomorrow night. And then Wednesday, Sabrina Scott will be with us. Sabrina is a witch, an artist, and a writer. She'll be discussing what it's like to be a practicing witch who has a degree in environmental studies. That's kind of an interesting combination, and she's pursuing a PhD. And then Bill Phillips will be with us Thursday night to round out the week, author of Signs from the Other Side. In that book, we'll be talking about the illumination of and demystifying of what Bill does, providing step-by-step guidance that allows readers to receive afterlife communication themselves, and sharing more than 20 inspiring examples of everyday people who've received messages from the other side. That's another great conversation, especially during this particular time of year. If you're just joining us on the stream, on the YouTube stream, be patient. We're going to work on the audio issues. We know there are problems. We don't understand why there are problems, but we're going to try to fix them during our upcoming break. A couple things beyond the show that I want to mention. We've got ScareCon coming up June 7th through the 9th in Framingham, Massachusetts. Now, this is an event that's fun for everybody. Families, adults, kids, doesn't matter. The name is a bit deceiving. It's not a scary event. It's a convention for people who are fans of horror, paranormal, sci-fi television, movies, that kind of thing. And I just have a pretty cool announcement here. If you've watched if you have Netflix and you like horror movies, you've probably come across a film called Terrifier. And if you're a fan of clown horror, you certainly have come across the film Terrifier, because Terrifier is the story of Art the Clown, and it's become quite a phenomenon, actually. I'm not a particularly big fan of clown horror movies, but that one was really, really good, and it's created quite a storm in the horror community. They are people are loving it, they're watching it, and the talk of Terrifier 2 is strong and loud. But ScareCon has just secured the director and writer. That's one person. His name is Damien Leone. And the actor who played Art the Clown in Terrifier. His name is David Howard Thornton. Both of those folks are going to be at ScareCon. And not only will they be there together, but they're going to do a full makeup photo shoot with Art the Clown. So David Howard Thornton will be getting into full Art the Clown makeup and will be doing a photo shoot with them, a professional photo op. That's pretty cool. That doesn't happen at many conventions, whether it's for Art the Clown or any other character. So if you're a fan of horror and you haven't seen Terrifier yet, go to Netflix, give it a watch, because I think you're going to like it. And if you haven't seen what else is going on at ScareCon, you should go to ScareCon.com, because there are a lot of great guests, including Billy Zane. You know him from Titanic. He played Cal. Heather Langenkamp from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Cassandra Peterson, who is better known as Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. A lot of other folks, too. There's a whole list. A 40th anniversary cast reunion of the movie Phantasm. Those folks will all be there, too. There are parties. There are panel discussions. There are a great selection of vendors. Just go to ScareCon.com, and you'll get more information and be able to check all that out. All right, let's see. Do I have anything else I need to talk about? I think that's good for now. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, and we'll get our guest on the line again. Tonight we'll be talking with Jason McClean. He's a biblical paranormal researcher, and we'll be talking about the existence of UFOs and cryptids like Bigfoot and how they actually validate the narrative that's found within the biblical texts. This is Beyond Reality Radio. I'm JV, and we will be right back.
ScareCon New England, the fan convention for all things pop culture, horror, and paranormal, is almost here. June 7th through the 9th at the Sheridan Hotel and Conference Center, Framingham, Massachusetts. ScareCon brings an amazing group of celebrities, including Cassandra Peterson. You know her as Elvira, Mistress of the Dark.
Elvira.
Heather Langenkamp, Amanda Wiss, and Lisa Wilcox from the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Plus, a 40th anniversary cast reunion and screening of the cult classic Phantasm. And many more. ScareCon also features panel discussions, film screenings, great vendors, and parties. It's a weekend of fun from start to finish. For more information, visit ScareCon.com or check us out on Facebook. Use the promo code BRR at checkout to save 25% on your admission. That's ScareCon.com. ScareCon.com. ScareCon New England is being held June 7th through the 9th in Framingham, Massachusetts.
Visit the website today. Use promo code BRR with your ticket purchase to save 25% on admission.
Yeah, I thought you might be a little distracted there. Okay, so what we're gonna talk about tonight here is paranormal in the Bible. A lot of people think those two things can't coexist, and in fact, the church itself says that they don't coexist and they can't support one another. But our guest, who we're about to bring on, Jason McClean, believes otherwise. He says he's a biblical paranormal researcher, in fact, and he says the existence of UFOs and cryptids like Bigfoot actually validate the narrative that's found within biblical texts. Jason has a couple of websites. JarOfPaint.com is one of them. He's also an artist and a comic creator. And then Siru Papers, SIRO Papers.com is another one of his websites. He's the author of several books, including How UFOs and Bigfoot Prove the Bible is True, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. That is specifically the book that we'll be addressing as we bring Jason into the program in just a moment here. If you haven't gone to the Beyond Reality Radio website, I encourage you to do that. There's a couple great things there, including a list of radio stations that carries the show, and the Beyond Reality Radio coffee mug is available for purchase there. Just click on the mug. There's a picture right on the homepage, and you'll be taken to a spot where you can buy it. And if you're ordering it domestically in the continental United States, shipping is included. If you want to order it from overseas or in Canada, we can do that too. You just have to reach out to us specifically. And then I'd invite you to stop by my Facebook page. It's just JV Johnson on Facebook. And as you know, we do have a YouTube stream, which is having some audio issues right now. It's not YouTube that's causing the problem. It's something to do with our connection here. And but either way, it's a great place to go for a visual version of the show. You can see what's going on in the studio. Plus, you can check out archived shows and other programming as well. It's JV Johnson on YouTube. Please subscribe to that channel. Please check it out. And let me entertain you that way as well as doing it right here on the air. And it looks like we're good. So, again, our guest tonight, Jason McClean, he is a biblical paranormal researcher. Jason, welcome to Beyond Reality Radio. It's a pleasure to have you here with me tonight.
Hey, it's great to be on, man. How are you doing this evening?
Well, you know what? I would be a lot better if the gremlins weren't in the computer systems messing up my mojo here. I'm having some audio issues that are just driving me crazy. I don't know if you're a Mac guy or a Windows guy, or neither or both. I don't know. But I've always been a Windows guy just because I've got so much invested in the software and the equipment. I'm just, but Windows has gotten to the point where they've tried to make it so easy to use that they've made it impossible to configure in ways that you need it to be configured to be more stable. And I'm having all sorts of trouble with it.
You know what? I am right there with you. I'm not kidding when I say this. I'm like you. I'm a Windows guy. They're easy to use, but I hate this move to, like, I get the whole idea of the app set up for your phone, right?
Right.
Your computer. I'm like, they've done everything, like you said, they've made everything so simple you can't do what needs to be done. It's no longer a workable platform. And my personal laptop that I've been using the last couple of years has now turned into a brick. And I've spent the last 2 days with my wife trying to set it back to factory standards just so I can, get everything back on there and start using it. But it's just gone to hell.
Yeah, I've had.
I'm right there with you, man. So it sounds like it's in the air.
I don't know. Sometimes I just wonder if they have these updates all the time, right? These computers are constantly updating, and now they do it without even giving a warning. They just say, "Okay, I don't care what you're doing right now, JV Johnson, but I'm going to update, so you're just going to have to wait." It could be in the middle of a program. But I'm starting to wonder, and this is the conspiracy guy in me. Is some of these updates bringing in some kind of obsolescence to this stuff to force you to go buy another computer, to force you upgrade software, to kind of force your hand and spend some money?
Well, you know what? If it wasn't for the fact that so many of Windows products have so many bugs out the gate, I kind of chalk a lot of it up to, honestly, just stupidity. I'm one of those people who, it's not that I don't believe in conspiracies by and large. I don't buy most conspiracies because they require humans to show, massive amounts of intelligence and organization, and history shows we're just not that smart, I know it's off topic of why you're having me on, but I have a friend, and we were talking about some conspiracies, and I said, hold on. I call it the Transformers effect. If you remember the original Transformers movie that came out that Michael Bay did, there's this scene where the survivors of the attack by the Decepticon at the beginning of the movie are being tracked through the desert by Scorponok. And they're ambushed at this small town, and they use some poor guy's sat phone. They make a collect call to the Pentagon, who then routes a C-130 to them that's specially loaded with special ammunition. They blow Scorponok away within seconds. And we're supposed to believe that this is how everything goes. Everyone's got everyone's that well organized. You make that happen, and I'm like, that's the most in an entire movie about alien transforming robots. That's the most unbelievable part of the movie, right? It's like if you know anything about how these things work, it's just we can't get together on stuff. The fact that we make a pot of coffee in the morning in the office is a miracle.
Yeah, for sure. Well, okay, so I'm hoping all the folks that are listening to the very, very odd audio stream that's coming through our YouTube stream, and that's, obviously we're mostly heard on radio stations, and that should be fine. But the folks that are struggling with the YouTube stream, please be patient. We will continue to work it out as we continue the conversation. And if you don't, if there's a problem, you just can't bear this strange audio, and you don't have a radio station locally that you can listen to pick up the program, when we edit the program and put it up back on YouTube tomorrow, it will be fixed, and a new audio track will be there. I promise that. Anyway, so let's start talking about the topic that we had intended to talk about, Jason. We've got just a couple minutes left in this segment since we were talking about computers for a few moments. But, I had mentioned in the lead up to our conversation here that religion, particularly the Bible, and paranormal topics tend to not go hand in hand. In fact, the church's position in many cases, and maybe even in all cases, is that these paranormal things do not exist. But you're of an opinion that the opposite is true.
I am. In fact, this is the situation that you've described is an accurate one, but I would argue it's a very, very new concept. The Bible, at its core, is essentially a paranormal book. But over the last 100 years or so, maybe a little bit more, in the West at least, we've rejected culturally the concept of the paranormal. Even the supernatural has been sort of, maybe turned into a philosophical concept, right? Where a lot of people who claim to read the Bible and believe in all of it, they don't believe in things like hell or angels or demons. And the book is inherently paranormal. The entire concept behind the Christian religion is that there is a God that transcends the universe. He created everything, that there are angels, there are demons, there are good and bad angels. People, can communicate with these creatures. We can have visions. People can be healed. They rise from the dead. And that he communicates through prayer and through the book. I mean, it's inherently paranormal. And the fact that the church has so stringently sort of rejected the concept of a lot of these paranormal phenomena that it used to accept, not very long ago, tells me that I think there's a larger problem, is that we've allowed this very materialistic sort of sense to pervade, and I think it means sort of a loss of the belief in the Bible itself. And the thing is, you go back 100 years, even just a little bit more, people absolutely believed in all these things. It was Christians who led the way on the paranormal because they understood that it was part of our worldview.
I don't know if there's enough time here to answer this question, so I'm going to pose the question, and I think we're going to have to carry it over to the other side of the break. But you're into the paranormal. You investigate and research the paranormal. You're also investigate and research the Bible or biblical texts. Which came first?
I honestly, for me, it went hand in hand. Just to sum up very, very quickly, and there's more to this. Obviously, we'll talk on the other side. But again, I am one of those people who just took the Bible at face value. There's a lot of layers into it, but the more I got into it, the more I realized I had to believe in these things. And a few experiences in my own life meant I couldn't reject what people were saying couldn't be real. And so I realized from a very early age that my understanding of reality was very, very different, both because of what I'd seen and because of what I was reading.
Okay, so let's take a break right now, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jason McClean. By the way, we will be taking your phone calls later in the program at 844-687-7669. It's Beyond Reality Radio. Did you know that online retailers like Amazon have constant deals that can save you money on the things you buy every day? It's no joke. Save 40%, 50%, even 80% on great products, and all you have to do is know about them. Noodle Shark is the way to be alerted when something good is coming your way. Noodle Shark is the social media page that lists great deals that not only save you money, but give you the deals before anyone else has them. All you have to do is find Noodle Shark on Facebook. Search it as The Noodle Shark. That's The Noodle Shark, because you deserve to save too. Become a shark and save. We really appreciate you joining the program. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm your host, JV Johnson. Like me on Facebook. If you can't find it, just search JVJ Paranormal and you'll find me there. Also, check out the YouTube channel. It's JV Johnson on YouTube, and give that a subscribe. Click the little bell icon. That way you'll know when we're doing live broadcasts or upload a new video. It makes it a lot easier to find that stuff that way. We'll take your phone calls later in the show at 844-687-7669. We're talking with Jason McClean. He's a biblical paranormal researcher. Couple of websites, Jason. We've got jarofpaint.com and cirupapers.com. Tell us what those websites are before we continue our discussion.
Well, Jar of Paint is sort of my general all-purpose website for me as an artist specifically, but it sort of touches everything, the books and whatever. It's just a way to get a hold of me if someone wants a commission of a comic book character or their favorite cryptid. They're more than willing to hit me up there. Ironically, on the technical side, still having trouble with that as well. There's an order form. If they can forget that, they can just email me Jar of Paint Comics at yahoo.com, and I'll be more than happy to take the commission. And then Ciru Papers is very specifically, it's the Society for the Investigation and Research of the Unexplained, and it is basically an organization I've started to present the biblical worldview of the paranormal, right? There are people out here doing this kind of work, but we're few and far between, and so I wanted a catch-all group that people can join. You don't have to be a Christian to join. I want everyone to join. I want the most broad and open discussion of this phenomena as possible. because that's how we get to truth. But the thing is, because the church has turned its back on this by and large, I've met a lot of people who don't know what to do with it. Christians who have their encounters. They see these things, or they're having problems with the supernatural, and they're like, "Well, I've gone to my pastor, and he says I'm crazy." Well, no, you're not. You're just experiencing something that he, for some reason, doesn't believe exists anymore. Because I believe, again, that this sort of this very Darwinian materialist view of reality has sort of become so mainstream that even people who are supposed to believe in the supernatural just don't. So again, we're posting papers all the time that are free, and I want them shared, that explore the supernatural in a lot of different ways.
When I think of many church phenomena, many biblical stories, whether it's angels or demons or the miracles that Christ was reported to have performed, over and over, these stories all have what I would consider to have a paranormal context.
Absolutely.
Yet the church doesn't see it that way. What are they missing, or what are we missing?
You know what? That's a very interesting question. One I've sort of explored for a while, and I honestly think a lot of this comes down to I hate summing it up as sort of banal, sort of a banal way, but it's peer pressure, right? Science came. Once science really got kicking with the Renaissance, and then you have the Enlightenment era. We started doing these testable things. In science, we started to understand that, hey, there's a better way to understand reality, and it grew out of Christianity. Christianity believed that that God set up the universe in a way to be known, and so that we can also know Him. And all your early scientists, most of them are theologians as well. But over the last century or so, somehow there was a very deliberate ideology change, and people say there's a conflict between science and religion, but it's not. I would argue it's really between two religious viewpoints. There's the theist viewpoint, and then you have this very specific version of atheism, this very Darwinian viewpoint that rejects any concept of not just God but the supernatural. And that sort of took over academia. Well, a lot of people, because it sort of became, science is real, science is materialism, this scientism, this very specific religious doctrine became very popular, and has sort of dominated the West for the last 120 years. And so because of that, a lot of people are like, well, we don't want to seem crazy to people if we want to minister to them. And so I think a lot of churches and a lot of people leading the church, they sort of see the more material problems of broken families, alcoholism, those tangible problems. And I think they're worried that if they deal with the supernatural, then people won't turn to them to help them solve those the real world issues that plague so many people. And so it's just that it's that peer pressure that won't allow them to speak on it. And I would argue that, yes, don't get me wrong, the paranormal, things like Bigfoot or living pterodactyls or UFOs and demons are issues that many people face, but by and large, broken family is probably a lot more common. If you're a pastor, you feel like you maybe have to pick one or the other. But I would argue that there's more to it than that. But again, you asked why we're in the situation. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I want to get back into why you chose to combine these two ideas and look at them together, because I know a lot of paranormal researchers. I know a lot of biblical scholars. I don't know many, if any, other than you, people that have combined the two. Once again, walk us through. Did you first have an interest in studying biblical texts and then start to see the paranormal connections, or was the opposite true? You saw the paranormal connections and thought, hey, I want to see if any of this exists in the Bible.
Exactly. It's the first one, right? My father, who was a mechanic, he basically said, I can believe anything I want. I just had to be able to prove it to him, or at least argue with him why I believed it. And so he never held anything. I grew up a Christian, don't get me wrong. He was a Christian, but he's the one who gave me my first copy of Chariots of the Gods, right?
Oh, yeah.
He wanted me to question everything. He wanted me to find out why. But as a mechanic, he was also very practical. He's like, there's so many theories out here, and he's like, but just stop and realize, what is the most practical? What is Occam's razor? Keep it simple, stupid. What is the most practical solution to your problems? And so as I studied the Bible, it became clear the Bible had a very paranormal viewpoint of the world in perspective. I realized I kind of had, if this is true, then I needed to also embrace the paranormal. And just when I was 12 or 13, I had an encounter with a living pterodactyl, and I know
whoa, back up, back up. What? You say this again?
Yeah. No, trust me. This is one of those things where people are like, okay, I think you buried the lead. I saw a living pterodactyl.
How old were you?
Exactly. That's the point. I'll be 39 this year.
No, how old were you when you saw the living pterodactyl?
12 or 13.
You were 12 or 13. Tell us what happened.
So I grew up in DeSoto, Texas, just 30 minutes south of Dallas, a little suburb. But there's a creek that connects to the Trinity, and it's a stone sort of creek. I was fishing with a friend. It was early, about 10 o'clock, and he was starting to get hot because it's the summer. He had already packed up and headed out. I'm packing everything up. I head into it's lined with trees. So I step into the tree line when I hear a noise that sounds like nothing I've ever heard in my life. The best I can describe it is that it was an angry crow, like an ugly, angry crow sound. And so I stop and I turn around. I'm trying to figure out what made that sound, and I see what at first I think is the world's biggest blue heron. I was a kid. I was out all the time, so I knew all the animals that lived in the area. I knew what a blue heron looked like, and that's what I thought it was at first. But it was flying low and literally gets the tip of its right wing literally gets within 5 feet of my face as it flies right by me. And that's when I realized there's no feathers on this thing. And what I thought had been its legs, when a heron or a crane flies, it sticks its legs out behind it.
Right.
What I thought had been that was actually a long tail with a flange on the end, and it just flew on. And I got a real good look at it as it flew on and then banked and flew away. Wingspan was about 8 to 10 feet. It was sort of a bluish gray, like a Payne's gray. And again, in many ways, it looks very much like a crane. How a crane will sort of make that S curve to its neck for as it flies. Very, very similar. But I could see where the feet were. I could see where the legs were. I could see where this tail was, and it had absolutely no feathers. It was just sort of this dull bluish gray, and it just flew on by. And as the years have gone on, I've come to understand that there are many, many people who have seen living pterodactyls. And you think of these things like you hear stories about Mokele and Mbembe, it's off, or the Ropin, right? You think of these things as being in the Congo or Papua New Guinea. You don't think about them here in Texas, but there are people very recently who have seen living pterodactyls way in South Texas, which is where I've usually heard of them. But even here, just south of Dallas, I have personally spoken with two different people who have seen them in the last 3 to 5 years, and one person saw one like 2 weeks ago. Ken Gerhardt, he'll tell you he's taken over 50 accounts of people who've seen living pterodactyls, many of them here in the U.S., both in South Oklahoma and North Texas.
Wow, I mean that's quite remarkable, actually. When you had this encounter, I don't know that you recognized what it was right away, but was it frightening to you?
I really didn't have time to be frightened.
Yeah.
Like I said, I knew something was coming, so I was prepared to see something that I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, right.
But what surprised me was, again, at first I thought it was something that I knew. Again, a blue heron, sorry. Sorry, my allergies are killing me.
It's that time of year for sure, yeah.
Yeah. And so I thought it was something I knew. I was just like, oh, it's a really, really big, blue heron. I was just really surprised to see it, and it wasn't until it got just right in front of my face that I realized what I was reading at. And I love dinosaurs. That was the thing that sort of surprised me, was I actually afterwards went back and double-checked my, one of those 50 books I had on dinosaurs, because I'm like, that looked like a pterodactyl, but, I'm a kid. I'm thinking pteranodon, the no tail, long crest with a beak, like you'd see in the Flintstones or Jurassic Park. And it just struck me as odd that it looked so much different from that. And then I found the Rhamphorhynchoid species of pterodactyls, which are these long-tailed, flanged pterodactyls.
Interesting.
And over the years, I've been able to do a little study, and again, I'm an artist. I was originally studying art history in school before I switched. And one of the things I learned going through, and I started realizing is that you can actually trace these things. And I talk about it in my book, Wyvern, which I'll argue is probably not very well written. But it shows that these things have been around forever, and we have observed them forever in artwork. In Europe, we call them the Wyvern, and it's again in Papua New Guinea, it's the Ropen. Here, it's the Thunderbird. It's these things keep popping up, and they're being seen. They're just very, very rare. Oh, and in the Bible also, they're one of the seraphs in Isaiah. It talks about these flying serpents.
Yeah, let's get into that. Let's hold that until on the other side of the break, because that'll open up a whole new line of questions. But when you started to look at biblical texts and biblical stories, what were some of the paranormal connections that started to jump out at you right away?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. It really gets back to Genesis 1. What is happening there? It's God. This thing that is beyond time and space is creating our reality and is conveying and trying to tell us why He did it. And we have a demonic influence that causes man to fall. In chapter 6 of that same book, we have angels, angelic beings, mating with humans, creating giants. I mean, it's the paranormal's all throughout it, and it's a very different worldview than what we've adopted in just the last 100 years. A supernatural worldview was very common throughout most of human history, regardless of what religion you came from, or even people. You had people who were atheists who believed in the supernatural. But over the last century or so, we've adopted this very materialistic Darwinian mentality, and anything. And what got me was, it wasn't necessarily what the Bible was telling me. It was when I was looking to see if I could disprove it through science, it was what science was covering up that made me really question what I was seeing. They would say, hey, this hammer that we found, fossilized in rock, well, that's a fake. And these human footprints, well, that's a fake. And these people who are seeing living dinosaurs today, that's all fake. And UFOs, and that's all fake. And ghosts, and all, it just kept going on and on and on. And I realized it's not, they didn't present an argument for it to be fake. They just said it was all fake. And that's why I realized we, in the 21st and 20th centuries, have adopted an ideology more than a science. And the more I dug into things, the more I saw that what the Bible was saying, very literally, that there are angels and there are demons and there are things that we would now call dinosaurs, that they called dragons back in the day. These things are all real, that there were giants, and on and on and on. There were miracles. That our modern worldview is propaganda. And that's when I realized that, again, that propaganda had sunk even into the church. I'm an artist. I would rather be drawing cartoons for a living, but I'm finding more and more that there's just not a lot of us willing to step forward and make that argument and be the crazy guy, right, who says, hey, there are pterodactyls flying around Texas. Like, you're the crazy guy if you say that. Believe me, I'm the first one to admit that. But it's true. And the problem is you don't get anywhere as a culture by lying to one another. You don't advance if you have to lie about everything. And ideology isn't true if you're having to lie about the very premise of it. And so for me, if I'm seeing if I'm just me, a mechanic's son in Texas, just who lives in Dallas, Texas, is seeing these incongruities, then there's something bigger going on. And so again, like I said, my father wanted me to. He said, you can believe whatever you want to believe, just prove it to me. So I went initially to prove the Bible was false, but the things the Bible kept saying, particularly in the wild stuff, the weird stuff, that kept coming up as true. People are seeing them and seeing a lot of these things, and that's when I kind of had to throw my hands up in the air. I'm like, okay, so then what we have is this story over here, this Darwinian atheist story, is propaganda. Then the things this thing is saying is checking out. Then let's really get into this. Let's really see what it says. And like I said, unfortunately, this culture that this very Western culture, because you go to the East, people believe in the supernatural. in the church. The church, people are performing exorcisms. They're seeing miracles. And I met my wife, who comes from a family of missionaries. And you want to hear some wild paranormal stories, talk to a missionary who's been in deep South America, living with the tribes, giving them medicine and preaching with them. They will tell you some of the wildest things that shamans have done to try and drive them off, and then something other bigger paranormal or supernatural happens to prove that the missionaries are from God. It's weird and wild, and it's a wonderful world that we live in. But the people need to know that these stories are true, that they're happening, and that people who have these encounters, so many of them, they hide it because they're scared of what everyone will say. And in many cases, it leads to problems.
There's a stigma associated with it. In the meantime, looking ahead to the programs for the rest of the week, tomorrow night, Brian Keating will be here. Brian is an astrophysicist. He'll be talking about some of the biggest questions that plague all of us, like how did the universe begin and evolve, and how will it end? How did life begin? And how did consciousness arise? These are all things that have plagued mankind. The answers have plagued mankind for a very, very long time, since the beginning. And we're going to try to get some answers tomorrow night with Brian Keating. And then Wednesday, Sabrina Scott will join us. She's a witch, an artist, and a writer. She's going to be talking about what it's like to be a practicing witch who has a degree in environmental studies. And she's also pursuing a PhD, an interesting combination. And then Thursday night's program, Bill Phillips. I believe he's a returning guest. I don't remember specifically. I think he's been on the program before. He's got a new book out that's called Signs from the Other Side, Opening to the Spirit World. We're going to be talking about how to demystify what he does. He'll also provide a step-by-step guidance that allows readers to receive afterlife communications themselves, and sharing more than 20 inspiring examples of everyday people who have received messages from the other side. So that rounds out the week. Friday, of course, will be a best-of program on the show. Just a quick mention, stop by ScareCon.com. That's the website for the upcoming event that I am doing. It is in Framingham, Massachusetts, June 7th through the 9th. A lot of great stuff going on there. I won't go over the details here, but just check out the website, ScareCon.com. All right, so once again, our guest tonight, Jason McClean, is a biblical paranormal researcher. And I want to get into some of the nitty-gritty here. Let's talk about your book, How UFOs and Bigfoot Prove the Bible is True. What's the premise here? I mean, what are, when people open or read the book, what do you expect them to walk away with?
Well, mostly the narrative. I've made the book very short and very colloquial because I don't want people to get lost in the reads, right? I'm a storyteller. I like to tell stories. The narrative of the Bible is the important thing, more than a lot of people get lost in trying to get the language and stuff. The simple fact is there's a story happening, and like anything, you should be able to make predictions. It's a model of how the universe works, and it allows you to sort of make predictions. You're like, well, if this story that we're being told is true, then we should expect to see X, Y, Z. And the things that we call cryptids, like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, or these living pterodactyls, all have a place in that narrative. And in fact, they're what you would expect to see if the narrative of the Bible is true. And even particularly the UFOs. I know this is where most people say, "Oh, you mean Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel?" And I'm actually working on a book that will discuss that a little bit more in more detail. But no, more specifically. Jesus said, that the end of towards the end of the days, things would look like they did in Noah's time. Well, what was going on in Noah's time? You had these supernatural creatures called the Watchers, or angels, mating with humans, creating hybrids, but then also teaching humans to not only advance technologically, but then how to create hybrids themselves, specifically with animals. And what is it that we're seeing today? We do see these living pterodactyls and things today, but then we're also seeing these, we call them UFOs and aliens today. But they are making hybrids with humans and themselves. That's been very prevalent in UFO lore for the last 60 years. And what are we doing now? And now it's actually public. I mean, I guarantee this stuff's been going on in secret for a while. But we're creating human-animal hybrids. Right, so we can quote unquote test medications, create whatever, but we're trying to manipulate DNA to, to breed better humans, ultimately, is what we're really trying to do. And this is all stuff that's predicted. I go back to what Aleister Crowley said back at the turn of the last century. He was, he was 20th century's biggest and most famous occult leaders. And he said, today we call them angels and demons, but tomorrow we will call them something else. And for anyone who studied Crowley, you've seen the drawings that he's done of Lamb, a demon that he conjured that taught him many old Enochian magics. The people who follow his teachings today will say that Lamb is actually a species of extraterrestrial aliens that they are now communicating with telepathically.
And that kind of changes everything, doesn't it? When we start thinking of things in those terms, and we think of these, what we would consider to be spiritual creatures, to be maybe interdimensional or alien in nature, it kind of changes the whole paradigm.
Well, and in fact, that's actually I would argue the sort of the reverse is true, or rather, they're one and the same, right? Most of you ufologists no longer argue whether or not the aliens that we see of today are the demons of and angels of 2,000 years ago. Most UFO researchers say they're one and the same. And again, like you said, interdimensional has now become a very popular buzzword. I would simply suggest that maybe these are just new terms for an old situation, but that what we're doing is what C.S. Lewis sort of theorized in his book, The Screwtape Letters. In it, he talks about how, as a demon, if you're pushing someone to be a materialist, they're secure because they don't think of God. But if you make them a witch, you can torment them as a demon, but then eventually they'll think of God and they could turn. And he theorizes that you could have something in the middle, something that allowed you to believe in the supernatural without believing in the supernatural. And that's what you have with UFOs. They have all of the trimmings of the supernatural, and yet we write them off as simply having exotic technology. And so it allows us to, it allows a lot of these people to have the many contactees to have these supernatural encounters, but then write it off as material and as only material and not supernatural. And you listen to the accounts that many people give of their abductions, even if they think that they're good things. They're terrifying and they are painful experiences, and they're being tormented. But on the same side, you can find, and things that many UFO researchers don't want to talk about, is that there are hundreds of accounts of people being able to rid themselves of these abductions and end these abductions using traditional Christian exorcism techniques, or even just saying the name Jesus has ended many abductions flat out, which indicates that a lot of what's happening here is not what we're being led to believe, but rather that this UFO phenomena is as much a deception as anything else. Not that it isn't real or that it isn't happening, but that what we're being allowed to, or led to believe, that they are aliens from another plane of existence, from another planet that's here to visit us, that's all a facade, that there's something deeper going on.
You were talking about giants before. Were we talking about the Nephilim?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you were referring to. Cause,
of course, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the Nephilim on this program in the past. It's a fascinating discussion to begin with. There's also references in the Bible to spacecraft, I would, for lack of a better way to describe it, right?
Well, and this, again, that's as I mentioned before, I'm actually, that's one of the books I'm working on as well, is sort of a response to this, because a lot of what people point to are, the big things are the visitation at Sinai and Ezekiel's wheel. And the thing is, those really, a lot of people pick and choose, their descriptions. What I would point to, though, is if you really want to look at it, is what Elijah and Elisha, his sort of sidekick, see in Chronicles. Elijah asks, Elisha, his sidekick, is having a doubt, is questioning God's ability to save them. And Elijah asks for his eyes to be open. He talks about how he sees these angels, they're surrounded by angels, on flaming chariots. So these are clearly angelic beings, but they're using some sort of craft to move. And a lot of people find that very strange, that the idea that angels would need,
right,
something to motivate on. And the simple fact of the matter is, we in the West have adopted many very pagan concepts of what angels can and cannot do. The Bible really describes most angels as being very similar to humans in many respects, and it shouldn't come as a surprise. In Psalms, it even says that mankind is made just a little lower than the angels. It shouldn't surprise us that angels would themselves have tools. They have swords. Why wouldn't they be? Why would they fly like Superman? Why wouldn't they have vehicles like we would need a vehicle? Particularly if they're going to interact with our reality, right? I mean, we have gravity. We're material beings. If they're going to move in our reality, they should have. It would stand to reason that they would need things like tools and machines to move from place to place. It just may be that these machines are made of different things. But beyond that, when you start throwing them, particularly when you throw the Nephilim in, these are physical creatures. In the ancient times, most of them were giants. But I point out in my book that with these elongated skulls that we've discovered, it's a pretty obvious story that they create. Most of these Nephilim created the early major empires, but that as they crossed with humans, that their bloodline became weaker and weaker, and so they would try and isolate the genome, which is why aristocracies only intermarry one another. They were trying to maintain those Nephilim genetics that led to mutations like these elongated skulls that lack a sagittal suture, and they became very, sort of weak. And they were all, most of them at least, seem to have died out, at least within the last 2,000 to 1,000 years. But they are still material creatures, and if they are still doing this program that we saw back in Genesis, right, where they're creating these hybrids, those hybrids need to have vehicles as well, because they're material creatures. They're just like us. So the UFO is something to be expected. If angels, if they were going to build themselves a craft to, these evil angels were to build a craft to hide their offspring, you'd imagine it would be pretty elaborate.
I want to talk a little bit about the reason you felt the need to write this book. What was it that really motivated you? I mean, obviously you were curious about the subject and inquisitive, but there must have been a real reason you felt the need to tell this story.
Yeah, let me sum it up by saying I think there's this perspective that there's a biblical, just that there's even a biblical perspective on the paranormal is an alien concept both to the church and to the non-church world. And I wanted to put something out that was easily understood, very short, so it wouldn't scare people off, and present that worldview in a succinct way, and explain it very, in a very common language so that it wouldn't be missed. But just to let people know that there is another way of looking at these things. We don't, if you're a Christian, you don't have to be scared of it. You don't have to run away from it. You don't have to pretend it doesn't exist. And if you're not a Christian, you need to understand that there's another perspective to what you're being told and what's being sold on, say, the History Channel, right? There's all, we have the only time anything has ever been bettered in our world is when all sides of an issue can be explored. And right now we're living in a world where Western culture says, okay, the paranormal doesn't exist. But then the few people who do say, no, the paranormal exists, you definitely can't listen to this group over here. And it's from both sides. So what all I'm really trying to do is generate that conversation and say, hey, let's look at this from all of the angles, and then let's decide which one is true. Let's test them all. Let's see which one actually pans out.
We have a minute before we have to go to break here. The book, is it available in hard copy or is it like Kindle? How is it available?
Actually, it's both.
Okay.
You can. It was written, designed as an ebook, so you can go to Amazon.com and download it as a Kindle. But it is also printed on demand. So if you're one of those people who prefers a hard book or a hard copy book like I do, you can order that and they'll print it off and get it to you lickety split.
Jason, let's go to the phone lines. Let's grab a listener call here. This is Fred calling from Charlotte, North Carolina. Hi, Fred. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, Jason, I've always thought that in Ezekiel, which you mentioned, that when he described it, I mean, it sounded like a flying saucer with the wheel and sparks and all that.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of those things where unfortunately, you really kind of have to. I'm an artist, right? That's one of the things that I noticed is that it does sound very much like a UFO because we see this wheel within a wheel, and there's sparks and there's flame, but you kind of have to you have to draw out the entire image, right? Everyone focuses on the wheel, but it's not just one wheel. There are 4 wheels. Each wheel is beside one of the cherubim, which are the 4 creatures. And the thing is, those wheels are for God's throne. They're the chariots. The creatures are holding up the throne that he's sitting on. And you have to draw out the entire image, and that's actually going to be something I'm going to be doing in the book, or one of the new upcoming books I'm working on, is actually fully drawing what each line says. And that's something that a lot of what's happened in popular culture is they'll focus on one or two aspects and not the entirety of the context of the verse, and that's true in churches as well.
I think that's part of your talent.
So it's one of those things where it does sound like it, but you kind of have to put everything in context.
Go ahead, Fred. What were you saying?
I think that's part of Jason's talent, is that he has the ability as an artist training that he has to see the detail. And the other thing I was going to say is I talked to some of my Christian friends. I'll bring up that, the giants come down. There's two stories of creation. The giants come down there and mate and so forth, and they just look at you like, a blank look. It's like that's gibberish. It's not part of our Bible. So he's right about that.
Yeah, and that's a real shame because I would argue that we lose so much of what's actually happening in the Old Testament. One of the big charges again that you hear about you hear Christopher Hitchens use it all the time. That God's this maniacal, hateful creature who's always committing genocide. The only time God ever is like everything has to die is when these creatures show up, because they are. When you really get into what they are designed to prevent the coming of the Messiah, the coming of Jesus. They are this contamination that's designed to keep mankind damned. In order for mankind, through the biblical text and narrative, in order to get to God, Jesus had to come, be born as a human being, and die, and then be resurrected, so he could atone for the sins of humanity. Without that occurring, all of humanity is damned. So what you see with the Nephilim, what they're trying to do is corrupt both man and animal, which is why, again, when the Jews are cleansing the Levant in Joshua, they're told, you can make peace with these people, but not these people. All of those are Nephilim tribes, and you have to destroy the flocks as well, because of what the Nephilim were teaching people to do. They were corrupting the animals as well. So it's one of those things where there's this much broader theme of a war on a material level, both supernatural and materially, between God and Satan happening. And that's something that we miss when you omit the Nephilim from the narrative.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. So how do you find your book?
Well, the newest book right now is on Amazon. In fact, all my books are on Amazon. You can just go to Amazon.com, type in how UFOs and Bigfoot prove the Bible is true. Or you can type in Jason McClean, a bunch of books will pop up. But you can order them straight from there.
Thanks.
Or you can go to my website, jarofpainting.com, or cerupapers.com, and there will be links to my books as well.
Thanks for the call, Fred, and this is a great question. We appreciate you joining the conversation. Let's talk about dinosaurs for a minute. You had your own personal experience with what you would consider to be a living dinosaur not too many years ago. First of all, how could dinosaurs, if they are whether it's a pterodactyl or something else, survive all this time, particularly survive in a bit of a hidden fashion where they're not commonly seen or accepted? And what is the connection between the Bible and, say, dinosaurs? Is there one?
Okay, a lot of questions there, so I'm going to do this as quickly as I can. Yes, there is a connection. We see them in Job 40 and 41 with the behemoth and Leviathan. Those are both relic populations of dinosaurs. Behemoth would be some form of sauropod, and Leviathan would be a type of mosasaur, which is a very large, aggressive animal, aquatic animal. And they do have parallels, right? We have the U-28 creature, which back during World War I, submarine, sunk a ship, and when its boiler exploded and the munitions exploded, this creature was blown out of the water. That was described as a 60-foot-long crocodile with webbed legs, or webbed feet instead of legs, which sounds very much like a mosasaur. In fact, a few years ago, and when I'm researching a little bit more closely, someone claimed to have seen one off the coast of a cruise ship. He looks out and he sees what he claims was a mosasaur. So we see these things. Mokele Mbembe was also a sauropod, and There are other claims to what they could be, and I'll address that in a later book as well, because there's a lot of text on that. But where have they been is the bigger question, and the answer is twofold. One, they've been here the entire time. We have every culture has a legend of a dragon, and different types of dragons, right? In the Epic of Gilgamesh, you have Humbaba, who guarded the cedar trees. Well, he's described as this giant monster that has horns like a bull. That sounds like a Triceratops to me. You have dragons depicted on urns and on the Babylonian gates. They're just very, very rare. And in fact, you have bestiaries and different accounts of dragons all throughout history that will tell you and draw them out. And again, as I said, the seraph or the flying seraph of Isaiah 14, which I believe to be an existent pterodactyl, very similar to the one I saw. You go to Europe, they're called the wyvern, right? But you come over here in the Americas, they're called the thunderbird. We used to see these a lot more often, but I think the simple fact of the matter is we don't see them because they're less successful than the other animals that survived the flood. Very recently, we've seen genetic testing that comes out and says most of the animals that we see today can be linked to within the last 100,000 years, as if they all just sort of emerged suddenly. And the same thing is said with humans. There's called the bottleneck theory, that about quote unquote 80,000 years ago, it came down to just a few thousand people, and that everyone who's alive today came from these genetic lines. The simple fact of the matter is, genetics is showing what the Bible said, that there was a catastrophic event in the past, and that only a few things survived. Of the things that survived from that previous world, right, everything would have adapted to this new environment, and the few things that didn't would seem very, very strange to us, like a dinosaur, or some of these other things, like the Andrewsarchus, which may have been the origin for the werewolf. These are creatures that look very strange to us now because they're just not common. And in the past, they were called dragons, and they were destroyed regularly. And as we've gone through many climactic changes over the last 1,000 years, particularly, we forget how radical our environment has changed over the last 1,000 years. These things have become more and more rare, but they still exist. And again, like you said, but where have they been? How could they have survived millions of years? Well, the simple answer to that is they didn't have to survive millions and millions of years, just a few thousand. That's that the flood is what fossilized the animals. The flood is what changed the face of the earth. It changed the nature of the environment, and everything had to adapt to it. And the things that didn't, we killed because they seemed very scary to us, and maybe they were dangerous.
Are you a religious person? Do you consider yourself religious?
You know what I do. I don't shake from that title. A lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm spiritual. I'm not religious." No, screw it. I'm religious. Spiritual is sitting around drinking chai tea at a Starbucks. Religious is getting into the text and finding out why people said what they said.
Do you consider the Bible to be a historical work? In other words, is it telling us history?
It is both a historical and a poetic and a prophetic book. It's all of the above, right? I think that there are aspects, and I'm willing to have the conversation, that some of the histories may be poetic in nature, right?
Well,
maybe Genesis 6 days isn't a literal 6 days, but a span of time. I'm open to that conversation. I don't think anything has just a one-piece answer. Personally, though, I am a young Earth creationist, and the reason for that is the evidence that I keep coming across that modern science that once accepted it has now rejected it. I can't deny it. When you see some of these artifacts that are found from the pre-flood world, they are simply amazing, and they are abundant. And again, you don't really. It's the narrative that makes the most sense of all of everything that's presented. Right now, I'm not saying the flood happened 4,000 years ago. I don't know when it happened. Right, that's still open for debate. That's part of the discovery. But the narrative that's told in the Bible seems to be the one that makes the most predictions that are accurate, and seems to be the one that jives with what I keep finding.
So what's next in your research? I mean, where do we go from here?
Well, like I said, I'm actually working on two different books. I may combine them to make life easier for everybody. But one of them is on the monsters. I literally call it the monsters of the Bible. Right, we're going to go into Because there are a lot of things that are metaphorical that people point to as like, oh, see, that's crazy. Well, it's a metaphor. But there are real legitimate creatures in the Bible, like you said, the Leviathan, the Behemoth, the Seraph, and the Nephilim, and explaining where they come from, what they are, how do we know what they are, and placing them sort of in the great chain. But then I'm also going to do a book called Answering Ancient Astronaut Theory, right? Basically looking at the things that are often posed as evidence of ancient astronauts or ancient aliens, and working through those and saying, hey, is that really what's being said here? Because there's a lot of bad evidence out there, particularly in the artwork that's used. And as an artist and studying, who was originally studying art history before I turned to archaeology in my studies, that's one that sort of hits me home, and I would like to talk a little bit more on that from my expertise.
Tell us a little bit more about the other books. We've been talking about how UFOs and Bigfoot prove the Bible is true, but you've got a lot of other stuff out too.
Yeah, a lot of them are actually, some of them are kids' books, trying to, teach just different things. But what consumed me from pretty much 2014 on was back in 2017 there was that alignment that people talked about a lot that got a lot of attention. Everyone's saying, oh, the world's going to come to an end and it's going to be the rapture. I had been writing on that since 2014. I wrote 4 books because they're all sort of connected ideas. I like doing sort of shorter books to, focus on one idea, just to sort of make sure it gets across. But I was one of the few people who from 2014 said, hey, this is the fulfillment of Revelation 12, right? It's the woman clothed in the sun. But that, it's not the rapture. In fact, nothing would happen on that day. But more importantly, it's not over until the year 2027. Many people were seeing it as they instinctively knew what it was, but they didn't understand why it was. And so, I had the first book that sort of explained it from, what it was and how we knew. Like, how do we know that it was actually the fulfillment of that prophecy, right? How these things are testable. God gives us everything in ways that can be tested and verified. It just takes a little time to sort through them. And then the others are the sort of ramifications of what that's about. What did that alignment actually tell us also about, what's coming? When are things coming, more or less? And what is the Antichrist? And there's a lot of layers to what was told. And just before the 2017 alignment, I then went ahead and wrapped all 4 books up into one. So if you're interested in that topic, in that concept, there's the 2017 and beyond tetralogy. That's all 4 books. It explains what the alignment was, what it means, and what the ramifications are. And I deal with things like, again, ancient astronaut theory in those books, as well as the Antichrist not being entirely human. I will argue that he is Nephilim. That what we're seeing right now with the UFO, with the current UFO phenomena, is the creation of world leaders that will be taking over in the future, and that they will look human, but they won't be entirely human.
Jason, we're out of time here. It's been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate you joining us tonight. Once again, give folks an idea where they can get a hold of the books and follow more of your work.
Well, everything's on Amazon, but they can go to jarofpaint.com or cerupapers.com. There are links to all my books on those pages, and if they want to get a hold of me, Jar of Paint comics at yahoo.com. You can hit me up with any stories you want to tell, or even place an order for a drawing or so. And
cerupapers.com is SIRU. That's how you spell that, just in case
correct.
folks
I'm sorry, yes, SIRU papers.com.
And if you had to recommend which of your books that someone should start with, is there one that you recommend?
I would argue that it depends on what you're really interested in. If you're fascinated by cryptozoology, I would say probably go with How UFOs and Bigfoot Prove the Bible is True. If you're fascinated with prophecy, I would go with the tetralogy. But if you're just more fascinated by UFOs, I'd do with either the UFO, How Bigfoot and UFOs Prove It's True, or I do have one on ancient astronaut theory that's a part of that tetralogy that's independent, and the cover says it all.
All right. Well, again, thanks for being here tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate the time. It's been great.
All right, we'll have you back soon, I'm sure. Jason McClean, again, check out jarofpaint.com. Thanks to everybody who's been watching the YouTube stream who's had to deal with some very bizarre audio issues. We're going to get those corrected for you for tomorrow night, I promise. Speaking of tomorrow night, great show on tap for you. Tomorrow we're going to be talking with Brian Keating. He's an astrophysicist. We'll be answering questions like, how did the universe begin and evolve? How will the universe end? How did life begin? And how did consciousness arise? It's a great program for tomorrow night as well. It's Beyond Reality Radio.
Beyond Reality Radio is hosted by Jason Hawes and JV Johnson and produced by Alexandria Johnson and Slick Eddie Edwards for Entercom Radio. Beyond Reality Radio is distributed by Westwood One Radio Networks. Stop by our Facebook page and say hello. Follow the hosts on Facebook as well. For Jason Hawes, follow at jasonhawes.taps. For JV Johnson, follow at JVJ Paranormal. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Radio or you have a suggestion for a guest, contact Slick Eddie Edwards at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com. Be sure to visit our chat room as well at beyondrealityradio.com. Thanks for listening.